If you're crazy and want to bark at people or throw them in front of a subway, do it indoors? Hello and welcome back to the Reactivist Podcast. I'm Marlene Shivo. I was watching an interview with Tucker Carlson. He sat down with New York City Mayor Eric Adams.
The single largest private sector employer in your city, of course, is banking.
Right.
And by far. And they're moving out. And so, how do you pay for a city of 8 million people if an increasing percentage of the population is poor? If the rich people are leaving, which they are.
They are leaving, and it's getting more expensive. People don't want to pay the kind of money that it takes to live in New York City, raise a family in New York City, forget that, and then walk the streets of New York a little more afraid or a lot more afraid, encountering aggressive people, just riding the subway to go to work or to go out. It's sort of like common sense, but that money starts to leave New York, and New York is going to have even more problems.
First of all, we have to stop that far left rhetoric that wants to demonize success. And far too often we do that. We want to be difficult to business. We want to demonize success. We want to do things that impact the quality of life in cities.
I was more intrigued about the things that came out of Tucker Carlson's mouth than I was by the things that Eric Adams said. Take a listen.
This is a liberal vision.
Mm-hmm.
You want to do weird stuff at home, we're not going to bother you, we're not going to ask any questions, but it's kind of up to you because it's your life.
Right.
That's kind of the liberal idea. Don't do it on the street. You want to have a parade, put your junk away at the Pride Parade. Don't have sex with people in ATMs. Don't smoke weed on the street. If, you're a violent, crazy person, don't bark at people on the subway or push them in front of trains. Just keep it indoors. Why can't New York arrive at that?
So let's dissect this for just 1 second. He doesn't want people flashing their body parts during a pride parade. He thinks that if you are crazy, you have the wherewithal to control your, quote, barking and, subway pushing. As far as crazy people go, I'm not so sure that they understand that they're crazy or that they're mentally ill or whatever the term you want to use is. So I would imagine that the average person who feels compelled to bark in public would be able to control that impulse. But the people that are pushing people onto the subway obviously can't control their behavior. So it's just kind of like a word salad. I understand where he was going with this. He's saying that these people are running the streets of New York City. They're using New York City streets as a home, a bathroom, a place to do whatever you want. It's sort of like this chaotic free-for-all. It's anarchy. I mean, I've seen it for myself many times. New York is so not what it used to be at all. There is a lot more craziness on the street. There's a lot more homeless people. But anyway, there's more.
Just for the record, I'm kind of against all immigration right now. We have too much of it. But I will also say, I've never seen an African immigrant do anything like that. They're not marching around with their junk out in parades or whatever. We have buttoned down people coming into the country, and the longer they stay here, the more they decide, I got to do this stuff on the sidewalk. I mean, it's a very specific, affluent liberal culture that promotes doing all that stuff in public. And I'm wondering why are they in charge of everything?
All right. I get that he's down on immigration. A lot of people today are absolutely down on the mass amounts of humans crossing the border and are living here undocumented, and taxpayers have to pay for them to be here. That part is understandable. But when he says, I've never seen African immigrants behave this way, what are you talking about? Have you been all over every city in America where there are African immigrants that you have been able to isolate that they are African immigrants? That's for starters. The second part is the part where he says they're not marching in parades with their junk out. Do you see what he did? He made the leap from immigrants to the Pride Parade, which are completely separate issues altogether, unless he's talking about gay immigrants. But let's be real, that's not what he said, and that's not what he meant. He's trying to differentiate between immigrants from certain places and their behavior attached to that. On top of it, he's sort of mixing a bunch of issues together as to what people should do behind closed doors. If you're going to interview the mayor of New York City and you just kind of want to make a point that the liberals are off the rails and they're running the asylum. You can make that point, but can you also get to the crux of the issues that New York City is dealing with and what the solutions are? And that's what I was waiting to hear.
You would not have one argument with me. Don't publicly inject yourself with drugs. Don't publicly urinate on the street.
Yeah.
Don't smoke in front of somebody's house, smoking your cannabis. If you want to smoke cannabis, do it at home.
Yeah.
If you want to urinate, go use the bathroom.
The people that are urinating on the street don't have a place to go to the bathroom because they're homeless. So this is a bigger issue here. It's not so much about the behavior, it's about the population that now exists in New York and is not being dealt with, is not being handled in any capacity. And in Eric Adams' defense-ish, because I'm not a fan of his, Bill de Blasio ran New York City into the ground. I watched it happen. New York was a wonderful place to live for a very long time under Mayor Bloomberg. And when de Blasio took over, little by little, you would see more homeless people, more mentally ill people, and nothing was being done about it. Oh, wait, that's a lie. He started putting them up in hotels, the way the migrants are now occupying hotels in New York. But it didn't stop the homeless population from increasing and increasing and increasing. And it hasn't decreased on Eric Adams' watch. So it's not about urinating on the street. It's about people living on the street. The other thing, when he says you want to shoot your drugs up, do it in your house, I actually disagree with that. Now, smoking weed is a different thing because it's legal in New York and they have cannabis shops all over the city. But as far as shooting up drugs, illegal drugs on the street, I actually think people should shoot up on the street so that they can get caught and then be held accountable for getting illegal drugs and using them. The only thing missing from this interview is a couple of bar stools and some beers, because this is more of a conversation. I wouldn't call this a hard-hitting interview whatsoever, which is kind of shocking because Tucker Carlson is someone who definitely has opinions and he's sharing them, but he's not really pressing Eric Adams on the solutions. Eric Adams, he's just sort of agreeing to Tucker Carlson, saying, you're not going to get an argument from me. You're right about everything you're saying. Great. He's recognizing that. You'd have to be an idiot not to recognize that. But he's not actually saying what it looks like to get to a better place. I mean, New York City is a landfill these days. And he didn't take care of the problems that are being talked about in these past 4 years. And now we are back in the election cycle and he's up for re-election. If I were him, I would take this opportunity to explain how he would go about resolving some of these issues, even if he doesn't have the funding he thinks he needs in order to implement these ideas. Perhaps the ideas themselves could be shared. It's hard to get funding for ideas that you're not sharing, right? I'm not saying there isn't a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, and Eric Adams hasn't exactly made a lot of friends along the way. He's more of a celebrity in New York City, and he's a guy who shows up at parties and he's down to earth, he's sociable, he loves the attention, but he hasn't made a lot of good decisions along the way. He doesn't seem to have what it takes to govern a place like New York City because it's in bad shape. I think Tucker Carlson's losing his edge a little bit, if you ask me. He's a pretty hardcore conservative, and he's certainly not a dumb guy. And I'm surprised that he didn't press Eric Adams on what he's doing or what he could do to secure his position for another 4 years. And not just that, but make New York City livable again. And I'm all for friendly discourse. I think that both sides of the aisle should be able to speak to each other without animosity and aggression. So I'm not really criticizing that aspect of it. But when you have this city, along with a lot of the cities across America that are in peril in a lot of ways. Banter is great, and being able to get along and being able to communicate in a professional way and treat each other like humans is great. And I'm all for it. But when the conversation leads to nowhere, I walk away from the interview saying, New York is going nowhere, and it's going nowhere fast.